Every October, across half of this country, millions of Americans go out into their own yards and rake up the single most calorie-dense wild food on the continent and put it out on the curb in a paper sack marked yard waste. They are hard. They dent car hoods. They roll underfoot on the driveway. They chip mower blades, and they turn a lawn into something you cannot walk across barefoot. And so every autumn in Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee and Virginia and Missouri, people gather them up by the bucket and throw them away. Here is what is inside them: 657 calories per 100 grams, 64 grams of fat, mostly the same monounsaturated fat that makes olive oil famous, nearly 13 grams of protein, and thiamine at a concentration that clears 80% of a full day's requirement in a single handful. Nothing else growing wild in North America comes close. A single pound of the shelled meat carries roughly 3,000 calories. That is a day and a half of food for a working adult, lying in the grass, being bagged for the landfill. The nut is the hickory, and before this country had dairy at any scale, before refrigeration, before a cow ever walked most of these forests, people here drank milk made out of it. That is not a metaphor, not a modern health food invention. The word hickory, the one printed on your bacon and your barbecue sauce, is not originally the name of a tree at all. It is the name of the drink. Welcome to Forgotten Roots. Start with the word, because the word is the whole story, and almost nobody who says it knows what they are saying. In Virginia Algonquian, the language of the Powhatan, there was a word recorded by English colonists as pawcohiccora, sometimes written pawcohiccora, sometimes pawcohiccora, depending on which colonist was doing the guessing. It did not mean tree, it meant the milk. Specifically, the oily white liquid pressed and boiled out of pounded hickory nuts. Captain John Smith wrote it down in the early 1600s. By 1653, the English had mangled it into pawhickory and were using it as the name of the tree. Then they clipped the front off and it became hickory. So every time an American says the word, they are saying a shortened, mispronounced version of the name of a drink that virtually none of them have ever tasted. The container survived. The contents were thrown out. And this was not a marginal food. It was the caloric backbone of an entire region. And we can prove it, because the evidence is buried in the ground. When archaeologists excavate sites across the eastern woodlands and float the soil to recover burnt plant remains, one thing comes up more than anything else: not corn, not acorn. Hickory shell. At several archaic period sites in western Kentucky, hickory makes up around 90% of the entire plant assemblage. 90%. Dig deeper and you find infrastructure built around it. At a site in Columbia County, Georgia, dated to roughly 4,000 years ago, excavators uncovered storage pits, fire-cracked rock, anvils, hammerstones, and soapstone slabs, all arranged for one purpose: cracking nuts at scale, a processing plant 4 millennia before the word existed. People were not snacking on these, they were running an economy on them. And that economy was still running when Europeans showed up to write it down. Between 1773 and 1777, the naturalist William Bartram traveled through Georgia, the Carolinas, and Florida, through Creek and Cherokee country, writing down what he saw. He found something that surprised him. Not wild trees, managed ones. He described ancient cultivated fields of hickory west of Augusta, Georgia, and noted that the trees were more fruitful in cultivated plantations than in the forest. These were orchards. People had been tending them for generations. Then Bartram recorded the harvest, and the number is the part that stops you. He wrote that the Creek stored the nuts in their towns, and that he had seen above 100 bushels of these nuts belonging to one family. One family, 100 bushels. That is not a snack, that is a granary. And he described exactly what they did with it. They pounded the nuts to pieces, cast them into boiling water, and passed the result through fine strainers, which preserved the most oily part of the liquid. They called it by a name that signified hickory milk. Bartram, a man not given to enthusiasm about food, wrote that it was as sweet and rich as fresh cream, and that it was an ingredient in most of their cookery, especially hominy and corn cakes. Read that again. It was in most of their cookery. Not a delicacy, not a ceremony. It was the fat you cooked with. It was butter and cream and stock, in a place that had none of those things, pressed out of something that fell off a tree for free. The colonists understood the value immediately. They used the milk the same way, as a spread and a cooking fat, and it entered the trade economy. One account from that period records a single quart of hickory milk exchanging for 19 pounds of pork. So the obvious question, if it fed a region for centuries, if it was worth that much in trade, if the entire country still says its name every day, how does a food like that disappear inside 2 generations? Not through a ban. Nobody outlawed the hickory nut. There is no villain in a boardroom here, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What killed hickory milk was geometry. Crack open a shagbark hickory nut and look at what you are dealing with. The shell is thick and the shell is hard enough that the standard advice is a hammer, not a nutcracker. And inside the kernel is not a clean half like a walnut. It is lobed and convoluted, folded into the ridges of the shell like a puzzle piece cast in place. Hit it too gently and nothing happens. Hit it correctly and the meat comes out in fragments, mixed through with shards of shell that have to be separated by hand, by eye, one piece at a time. That is the whole problem. There is no machine. Through the entire industrialization of American food, through mechanized harvesters and mechanized shellers and mechanized sorters, nobody ever built the thing that could economically open a hickory nut and get clean meat out the other side. Every gram of it is human hands. In a subsistence economy, that labor is invisible. It happens in the evening by the fire, alongside conversation, and the calories that come out are worth far more than the hours that went in. In a wage economy, that same labor is fatal. The moment a person's time has a dollar figure attached to it, a food that takes an hour to yield a cup becomes economically impossible. Hickory did not lose a fight. It lost an accounting exercise. And we know exactly what would have happened if it had won, because one hickory did. Here is the fact that reframes everything. The pecan is a hickory, not a relative, not a cousin twice removed. Same genus, Caria. Botanically, a pecan is a hickory nut with a thin shell. And that thin shell was not an accident of nature. It was made by a man, and he was owned by another man. In the winter of 1846, at Oak Alley Plantation in St. James Parish, Louisiana, an enslaved gardener, known only as Antoine, did something the agricultural establishment of the era believed was impossible. It was accepted at the time that nut trees could not be improved by grafting the way apples and peaches could. Attempts had failed for decades. Antoine grafted 16 trees successfully. Then he grafted more. By the end of the Civil War, there were 126 grafted trees on that property. What came off them was a pecan with a shell so thin you could crack it in your bare hands. They called it the paper shell. In 1876, it was exhibited at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, where it took the prize for Best Pecan Shown and was given the name Centennial, the first named pecan variety in the world. Every commercial pecan on Earth descends from the technique Antoine proved. More than 1,000 varieties grown on every continent except Antarctica. By 1936, pecans were out-earning cotton in parts of Georgia. The man who made that possible is recorded in his owner's ledger in a single line. As a Creole gardener, an expert grafter of pecan trees, valued at $1,000. His father had been kidnapped from the Congo. He was never paid and never credited in his lifetime. And his original trees were later cleared to plant more sugarcane. So sit with the comparison. Two nuts from the same genus, growing in the same country, with nearly identical flavor and nearly identical nutrition. One of them got a thin shell and became a global industry worth billions. The other kept its thick shell and became the thing you rake off your lawn. The difference was not taste, it was not nutrition. It was whether a machine could open it. And while the food was disappearing, the word was going everywhere. Hickory wood is one of the toughest, most shock-resistant timbers in North America. It absorbs impact without splitting, which made it the default for anything that gets hit for a living. Axe handles, hammer handles, wagon wheels and wagon spokes, bows, drumsticks. The original golf shafts still called hickory sticks. And, before it was a flavor, hickory was what school teachers reached for when they wanted a switch. When Americans wanted a word for a man who could not be broken, they used this one. Andrew Jackson's soldiers called him Old Hickory, and the whole country understood the compliment instantly. And then there is the smoke. Hickory smoked bacon. Hickory smoked barbecue. Hickory in the sauce aisle, on the crisp packet, on the menu. This nation eats the word hickory constantly, in enormous volume, at industrial scale. It just stopped eating the hickory, except in one place, where it never stopped at all. In Oklahoma, in the Cherokee Nation, and among the United Kituwa Band, a food called kanuchi is still made every autumn, and it is made almost exactly the way it was 300 years ago. The nuts are gathered in October after they have fallen. The green outer husks are pulled off immediately, and the nuts are dried near a heat source, which hardens the shell and keeps insects out. Then they are seasoned. Cherokee teaching holds that the nuts must sit at least a month before use because a fresh nut still tastes green. Then comes the work. The nuts are cracked, often with a rock, and sifted so the meat falls through and the shell stays behind. The meat goes into a wooden mortar called a canona and is pounded with a pestle until the oil comes out of it and the whole mass turns into a thick dough. That dough is packed by hand into a ball roughly the size of a baseball, and it will keep for months. When you want to eat, you drop the ball into boiling water. At first, the oil separates and floats. Then, as it cooks down, the oil goes back into the liquid and the whole pot turns into something thick and creamy, strained and served over hominy. There is a woman named Mary Wolfe, a United Kituwa Band citizen, who has been making kanuchi every autumn for 68 years. She learned it from her mother. She wraps the balls in foil and keeps them in the freezer, and she prefers to talk about it in Cherokee. There is a belief attached to the dish that the smell of it cooking will guide the ancestors back to the family gathering, which is a fair description of what food does when a whole culture keeps hold of it and a whole country does not. So go back to the person with the rake. What is in that sack is a nut with a buttery, maple sweet flavor that most people who taste it rank above the pecan. It carries more calories per gram than almost anything else you could forage. Its name is on their groceries. Its wood is in their tools. Its cultivated cousin is a billion-dollar industry. And they are throwing it out because it takes 20 minutes with a hammer. If you want it, the tree is easy. Look for shagbark hickory, which announces itself. The bark peels away from the trunk in long gray plates, curling out at the ends like the tree is shedding armor. Nothing else looks like it. Gather the nuts off the ground in October, dry them for a few weeks, and taste one before you commit, because the bitternut hickory nearby is not dangerous, but is genuinely awful, and you will know within a second. Then, crack a couple of handfuls, simmer the pieces in water for about 20 minutes, and strain it. What comes out is pale and rich and slightly sweet. It is the oldest milk in America, and the whole country still says its name without knowing it. If this changed how you see the trees on your own street, subscribe to Forgotten Roots. There is a whole continent of food we were taught to walk past, and we are digging it back up one story at a time.